great story of Absalom, betrayal, war, and grief. Absalom's story in the Bible is a tale of ambition, family conflict, and deep personal loss. It unfolds in the books of 2 Samuel, and his tragic rise and fall offer important lessons about leadership, family dynamics, and the consequences of unresolved conflict. Below is a comprehensive narrative covering the background of Absalom, his rebellion, the events leading to war, and King David's grief after Absalom's death. Absalom's early life and family conflict. Absalom was one of King David's sons, born to Maacah, the daughter of Talmai, the king of Geshur. He was noted for his striking appearance, with the Bible describing him as the most handsome man in Israel, from head to foot without blemish. His long, flowing hair became a symbol of his beauty, but also tragically played a role in his downfall. Absalom's family life was marked by deep conflict. His sister, Tamar, became the victim of a terrible wrong when their half-brother Amnon, David's eldest son, mistreated her. After Amnon carried out his actions against Tamar, he cast her aside, leaving her to live in disgrace. Absalom, furious over the injustice done to his sister, waited for David to punish Amnon, but the king did nothing. This inaction planted seeds of bitterness in Absalom's heart. 2. Absalom's revenge. After 2 years of brooding over his sister's mistreatment, Absalom decided to take matters into his own hands. He invited all of David's sons to a sheep shearing feast, and during the event, he ordered his servants to kill Amnon, avenging Tamar's dishonor. After the murder, Absalom fled to his maternal grandfather, the king of Geshur, where he remained in exile for 3 years. During this time, David grieved for Amnon, but also longed to see Absalom, despite his crime. Eventually, through the intervention of Joab, David's general, Absalom was allowed to return to Jerusalem. However, David refused to see him for 2 more years. This cold reception further strained their already troubled relationship. 3. Absalom's growing ambition. Absalom's return to Jerusalem marked the beginning of his rise to power. Frustrated by his father's indifference, Absalom began to position himself as a man of the people. He would stand by the city gates, where disputes were brought before the king for judgment, and he listened to the grievances of the Israelites. With subtle manipulation, he expressed sympathy for the people's plight and suggested that if he were in power, their cases would be heard and justice delivered swiftly. This clever maneuvering won the hearts of many Israelites. Over time, Absalom gathered enough support to launch a rebellion. He asked David for permission to go to Hebron, ostensibly to fulfill a vow to the Lord. In reality, Hebron was where he planned to declare himself king. 4. Absalom declares himself king. While in Hebron, Absalom sent secret messengers throughout Israel, instructing them to proclaim him king. Many Israelites supported him, believing that Absalom would be a more just and effective ruler than David. His conspiracy gained further strength when Ahithophel, one of David's trusted counselors, defected to Absalom's side. The rebellion grew swiftly, and soon Absalom had an army marching toward Jerusalem. Mark 5. David flees Jerusalem. When David received news of Absalom's revolt, he knew that a battle in Jerusalem would be catastrophic for the city and its people. Instead of fighting, David made the difficult decision to flee the capital. He gathered his loyal household and followers and left the city, weeping as he ascended the Mount of Olives. David's departure was a moment of profound sorrow and humility, a sharp contrast to his earlier triumphs as king. As David fled, he encountered Shimei, a relative of the former king Saul, who cursed him and threw stones at him, blaming David for Saul's downfall. Though David's men wanted to retaliate, David stopped them, believing that Shimei's actions might be part of God's will. David's attitude reflected his deep humility, trusting that God would judge his actions in due time. Number 6. David's strategy and the delay in battle. During his escape, David made several strategic decisions. He sent Zadok, the priest, and the Levites back to Jerusalem with the Ark of the Covenant, entrusting the future of the city and his kingship to God. David also sent Hushai, one of his loyal advisors, to stay in Absalom's court and pretend to serve him. Hushai's mission was to counteract the counsel of Ahithophel, who was known for his brilliant military strategies. Upon entering Jerusalem, Absalom sought advice from Ahithophel, who recommended a swift attack on David. He advised Absalom to immediately pursue David while he was vulnerable, strike him down, and secure the throne. However, Hushai, acting on David's behalf, suggested a different plan, that Absalom gather all the forces of Israel and personally lead them into battle. Flattered by the prospect of leading such a grand army, Absalom followed Hushai's advice, delaying the attack and giving David time to regroup. Nar 7. The Battle of Ephraim's Wood. David and his loyal forces regrouped in Mahanaim. Though outnumbered, David's men were experienced warriors, and they prepared for the coming battle. David wanted to lead his troops into battle, but his commanders convinced him to stay behind, fearing that Absalom's men would target him specifically. Before the battle, David gave explicit orders to his commanders, "Deal gently for my sake with the young man Absalom." 2 Samuel 18, verse 5. Despite Absalom's rebellion, David's love for his son remained, and he did not want to see him harmed. The battle took place in the forest of Ephraim, a dense and treacherous terrain. Though Absalom's army was larger, David's men were skilled and familiar with the terrain. The forest itself claimed many lives as the battle raged on, with David's forces ultimately overwhelming Absalom's troops. Hasher 8. Absalom's death. As Absalom fled the battle on his mule, his hair became entangled in the branches of a large oak tree, leaving him suspended between heaven and earth. One of David's men saw him, but, remembering David's command, did not harm him. However, Joab, David's general, ignored the king's order and struck Absalom down, killing him and ending the rebellion. 9. David's grief. When David received the news of Absalom's death, his grief was overwhelming. The victory in battle was hollow for David, as he mourned the loss of his son. His cry became one of the most poignant moments in the Bible. "Oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom. Would I had died instead of you, O Absalom, my son." 2 Samuel 18:33. David's loud and public mourning deeply affected his troops, who had just won a decisive victory. His sorrow over Absalom's death was so intense that it demoralized his men, who returned from battle in shame as if they had been defeated rather than victorious. Joab, seeing the impact of David's grief on the morale of the people, confronted him. He told David that his weeping for Absalom was discouraging his loyal followers who had risked their lives to save him and his kingdom. Joab urged David to go out and speak to his soldiers, which David eventually did. Conclusion. Absalom's story is a powerful narrative about the destructive effects of unchecked ambition, unresolved family conflicts, and the heavy burden of leadership. Despite Absalom's betrayal and rebellion, David's deep love for his son remained unshaken, making his grief all the more profound. The story serves as a reminder of the personal toll of power, the consequences of unresolved injustice, and the tragedy that can result when familial strife spirals out of control.